citizens of this world, all over the globe, online at the moment, waiting to listen to this gentleman, Professor Olukoya, Ogen, who obtained the degree of Doctor of Philosophy in History. I present to you this gentleman, ever smiling, never hungry human being, Olukoya Ogen. Present the first lecture of this university. Professor Ogen.
My business DVC's principal officers of the university, chairman board of trustees ICT University, VC ICT University, DVC's ICT University, my Lord, Spiritual and Temporal, visiting vice chancellors, provosts and rectors, former vice chancellors, members of council, members of senate, provost, deans and directors, heads of department, members of staff, invited guests, ladies and gentlemen, of course our dear students. We thank God Almighty for a day like this. The topic of today's inaugural lecture is Reconstructing a Silenced Past, Echoes of Revisionism and Counter-Hegemonic History. Today's inaugural lecture is the 21st in the history of Osun State University, but the very first from the Department of History and International Studies. It is coming 12 years after my occupancy of the first chair of history in this university. This predestined delay is not only a deliberate choice, but is also due to the vicissitudes of my career trajectory. Eminent historians who have presented inaugural lectures and who have traveled this long period of delayed inaugurals include Emeritus Professor Akinjogri, who presented his inaugural lecture 9 years after becoming a professor. The lecture remains a classic up to today. Emeritus Professor Jide Oshitokun, who delivered one of the most famous inaugural lectures at the University of Lagos 16 years after becoming a professor. In fact, the current president of the Historical Society of Nigeria presented his recently after 12 years. Similarly, Emeritus Professor Antonia Shiwaju presented his exactly 6 years, 6 months, and 6 days. And incidentally, that inaugural lecture earned him an invitation from the head of state, the then head of state, Muhammad Buhari. Mr. Visisa, given the quality and impactful outcomes for the aforementioned inaugural lectures, perhaps it is plausible to argue that this tendency is suggestive of the need for revisionism in the already established protocols relating to the timing of the delivery of inaugural lectures. This presentation is about revisionism, and we are starting the revisionism even from our inaugural lectures. Scholars are in perfect agreement that Yoruba intellectual production is so impressive and that it remains unrivaled in sub-Saharan Africa. Yet, contemporary Yoruba in favor of the central and western parts only. Ironically, in terms of size and population, the eastern part of Yoruba land that has often been neglected or silenced in the mainstream of Yoruba historiography represents almost half of Yoruba land. Thus, the primary thrust of my research over the years has been aimed at redressing a significant part of this historiographical lacuna. Consequently, my scholarly attention has mainly been concentrated on southeastern Yoruba land, where I have painstakingly examined such variables as origin, migration, ethnic identities, traditional economics, the dynamics of the slave trade in eastern Yoruba land, and of course, international economic relations. In the process, I have concentrated on hitherto neglected tips of taking a hard look at popular but erroneous assumptions and beliefs. I have also challenged and reinterpreted some aspects of the body of Yoruba hegemonic historiography and canonical works. Of course, my main emphasis has been on the production of non-scientist history that will recover suppressed and historically marginalized voices. Methodologically and theoretically, in my major works, I have questioned the absolute authority of archival documents and straight oral narratives derived from official sources in African historical reconstruction. In their stage, I have relied primarily on credible evidence from sister disciplines, such as ethnography, empirical comparative dialectology, lexical statistics, glottochronology, totemism, place poetry, place names, titles, and so on, to arrive at my findings. In some of this work, I succeeded in firmly establishing an empirical as well as an interdisciplinary framework for Yoruba identity and migration studies. Most of this work amply reflect the appropriation of the invaluable benefit of the usage of theories and comparativism to illuminate historical analysis, thereby underscoring the beauty of the knowledge that is always advanced through historical theorization, contrast, and comparison. Given the methodological slant of my scholarship and its associated legal findings, some of which successfully challenged existing canonical works and logically established hegemonic historical narrative, a section of the Yoruba intelligentsia and hegemon continue to interrogate such counter-narrative with cynical calculus. For them, it is sacrilegious to revisit historical events that are already settled. Such bold attempts are erroneously and deliberately tagged revisionist history. Mr. Vice Chancellor, the thesis of this inaugural lecture is to demonstrate with incontrovertible theoretical and empirical evidence that all history is revisionist history. In fact, the foundation of all new knowledge and human progress is rooted in revisionism. Revisionism emanates from historical thinking of a very high profundity of thought processes. It is anchored on solid and massive scholarship. A revisionist historian remains a shining and an inspiring intellectual light, a beacon of knowledge and creativity. Intrigued by the unknown aspect of Yoruba pre-colonial history or its silent past, I have made significant contributions to historical scholarship by developing an all-encompassing methodology that combines linguistic, historical, ethnographic, cartographic, and social science techniques. The framework draws from a variety of academic disciplines which offers a nuanced and comprehensive knowledge of Yoruba culture. Professor Toyin Balola hit the nail on the head when he remarked that in the world of history, and I'm quoting him now, there are two kinds of historians, those who narrate history and those who make history while narrating it, and whose contribution to historical scholarship are a work of history in themselves. For a discourse that is well grounded philosophically, theoretically, and conceptually, a brief detour to consider the philosophical undercurrent of revisionism and hegemonic history will be apposite as our starting point. Theoretical and philosophical use in revisionism and hegemonic history. What we call revisionist history today started about 2,500 years ago with Herodotus and Thucydides, the celebrated Greek founders of Western historical writing. The abiding conviction is that robust arguments about the realities, significance, and meaning of the past should be cherished as an integral element of an open society. Herodotus, the father of history, took the first step towards distinguishing historical inquiry from myths. The shift in emphasis must be considered as the first fundamental revision in the ways of conceptualizing the past. Herodotus made history a subject of rational analysis and explanation. He also began to banish God as causal agent in human affairs and subjected his sources to critical evaluation. Revisionism was Thucydides' answer to those who challenged the conventional historical methodology of Herodotus and the validity of his enterprise. Thucydides decided to write the history of the Peloponnesian War, and by so doing, he turned his back on the past and wrote the history of an event whose significance lay in the future. And he succeeded in producing a masterpiece, a historical masterpiece of the event as they unfolded before his very eyes. This development became critical for the future of the history of historical writing. As far as hegemonic history is concerned, Antonio Gramsci's concept of hegemony has provided one of the most influential theoretical frameworks for understanding hegemonic history. Conceptually, hegemony refers to a historical process in which a dominant group exercises moral and intellectual leadership by winning the concept of subordinate groups into its fold. Consequently, the dominant group's worldview is accepted by the subordinate groups as their worldview, and the dominant group interests are accepted as the interests of the society at large. Scholars have argued that subordinate consent is usually the outcome of sheer manipulation. Thus, the formative process of hegemony also involves the deployment of cultural, mythical, spiritual solidarities to build a historical bloc. This view of power highlights the cultural dimension of power and offers insight into the submission of subordinates under hegemonic consensus. Interestingly, and as pointed out by Raymond Williams, the inherent contradictions and instability of hegemony and the possibility that subordinate and popular groups will form counter and alternative hegemony sooner or later have always been recognized. Given the penchant for historical conservatism, proponents of hegemonic history derive great inspiration from their support of evolutionary change. For them, since society is a constant process of evolution, adopting a revolutionary or revisionist stand is both foolish and contrary to the lessons of the past. The British statesman and political theorist Edmund Burke, in his most important work titled Reflections on the Revolution in France, believed that political action should be rooted in tradition and experience. For him, respect for tradition promotes continuity and societal stability. Hence, his popular quote that change is only necessary in order to conserve. So it is still, whenever you want to change, you must conserve. Conservatism. Unlike other social contract theories such as Jim Rousseau, John Locke, and Thomas Hobbes, Burke believed that society is but a contract between the dead, the living, and the yet to be born. The canonization of Yoruba history naturally flows from the idea that Yoruba society must necessarily operate like an organism. In this sense, the whole of an organism is seen as more important than the individual parts. Local cultural peculiarities that are at variance with the existing canons must be glossed over, repressed, and silenced in the defense of the whole. Lévi-Strauss, the master of all mythographers, in his introduction to Science of Mythology, analyzed myths, rituals, and narrative from various cultures to reveal the deep binary structures that shape human thinking. He argued that myths deal with fundamental questions of human existence in metaphoric and symbolic ways. Thus, we cannot but agree with him when he has found that cultures are nourished by myths, and that's very important. Cultures are nourished by myths and not by facts. Herein lies the crux of the matter. Ideally, the professional historian is trained to look for facts and to dispel myths. Nations that do not cherish the fact-based past offered by the historian must therefore turn to myths and hegemonic ideologies to sustain and nourish canons. According to the UNESCO, culture is who we are and what shapes our identity. Indeed, UNESCO places culture at the heart of sustainable development. Similarly, within the framework of the Sustainable Development Goal, SDG 11, Target 11.4 calls for the strengthening of efforts to protect and safeguard the world cultural diversity and the protection of marginalized groups. According to UNESCO, this relatively new thinking represents an unparalleled recognition of the pivotal role of culture in engendering sustainable development. Silencing our cultural diversities in order to defend the status quo is gravely anachronistic and a lowly descent into intellectual barbarism. There's the urgent need to promote the free dissemination of alternative historical sources, interpretations, and narratives. Given the evolution of time, new evidence and new methods for examining old evidence emerge and new subjects of historical inquiry may be appear. All these realities provide a general context for the existence of revisionist history. The first aspect of my presentation will now go to ethnicity, politics, and the canonization of Yoruba history. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, the concept of ethnicity and politics as applied in this lecture are informed by the fact that ethnicity remains a complex cultural phenomenon that is deeply associated with virtually all aspects of human existence, particularly its politics and its way its history is interpreted, analyzed, and written. A focus on ethnic studies enables scholars to investigate the relationship between culture, identity, and politics. This lecture also adopts the simple layman definition that history is the systematic study of the past and the pervasive meaning that historiography has to do with the history of history writing, including historical sources, themes, philosophy, its practitioners, historical interpretation and analysis, as well as its various methodologies. Historical canons are established positions. They are time-tested arguments that are widely accepted. It is sacrilegious to query their authenticities. They are beyond scrutiny. However, a major thrust of my scholarship is on the process of canon formation and the interrogation of hegemonic canons with a view to offering counter-hegemonic and revisionist narratives. Apparently, this is a delicate and dangerous intellectual enterprise because of the usual threats and harassment by hegemons, their agents, and the conservative establishment. I subscribe to the view that there are no settled issues in history. I stand by the position of E.H. Khan that history is a continuous dialogue, a robust debate in which every historian is at liberty to join. Historical canons are inherently and innately conservative. They threaten and challenge our right to conduct historical research in accordance with the tenets of our noble profession. In recent times, the weaponization of the past for political and socio-economic advantages at the detriment of historical truth is gradually turning into a performative circus show. As the establishment and its conservative intellectual arm increasingly collaborate, strategize, and fund their resistance to progressive institutions and research, attacks on new historical understanding and identify revisionists are becoming more organized. Historical knowledge production and distribution is becoming strategically conditioned towards a predetermined end. This dangerous trend needs to be countered by a revitalized revisionist school of Yoruba historiography. This approach requires courage and strong determination. The good news is that more than ever before, revisionist scholars are now being protected worldwide because they are a real bridge who continue to advance the state of knowledge. The activities of two global networks stand out in this regard. The first is the Scholars at Risk Global Network. This is an organization that has been protecting scholars and the freedom to think, question, and share new ideas. It also renders advisory and referral services and protects scholars solving grave threats to their lives, liberty, and well-being. Every year, the network provides assistance to more than 300 threatened scholars worldwide. The second is the History at Risk Network, which is an arts and humanities research council-funded global network of historians working on difficult, controversial, and risky histories and offering support and solidarity. Thus, revisionist historians no longer need to be afraid of intellectual martyrdom because hegemons who threaten their lives risk global opium of the most unrestrained kinds, followed by international forensic criminal investigation and possible prosecution. Interestingly, Mr. Vice President, sir, my methodology for reconstructing the pre-colonial history of the Southeastern Yoruba continues to generate robust and sometimes heated scholarly debates across the world. For instance, a highly critical rejoinder to a slave trade article that I published in 2009 attracted venomous intellectual rejoinder from Professor Olatunji, one of the leading and outstanding Yoruba historians of my generation, writing in the most magisterial manner from his base at Brock University, St. Catherine's, Canada. He did not only condemn my methodology, but also attempted to tear so many of my findings into shreds. Interestingly, his rejoinder was published in the next edition of the journal where my own article appeared. His virulent critique fired me to publish a counter-rejoinder in the same journal in 2021. It was the third article in a row on a very controversial subject matter. During this latter academic discourse, I painstakingly pointed out an avalanche of historically inaccurate, misleading and contradictory assertions made by him. I revealed that his so-called modifications merely reflected his abysmal ignorance of the history of the Southeastern Yoruba. My counter-rejoinder also accused my critique of trying to elevate jaundiced archival data on the Southeastern Yoruba to an unquestionable pedestal. My conclusion was that by celebrating an unfortunate long-Western prejudice against the credibility of oral sources, his approach represented part of a neoliberal assault on an authentic African historiography that the rejoinder was not only modeled from a historiographical point of view, it was also deficient in its understanding of Southeastern Yoruba pre-colonial history. But what is of significance is that this debate between us enabled a zone that has often been referred to as the backwater of Yoruba history to come into the limelight, and people started paying attention. I further challenged my esteemed critic to a continuation of this great debate and was fervently looking forward to a progressive escalation of our academic dialogue. After waiting for more than a decade, perhaps it is reasonable to assume that allow me to have the last word on a matter that questions the credibility of colonial-oriented and Western-biased historical sources is largely celebratory of the triumph of the authenticity of oral and alternative multidisciplinary sources when it comes to the reconstruction of the history of African prolific peoples. Nonetheless, what is remarkable about this debate was that my preoccupation with the stream and strands of slave trade history received a big global boom immediately after this intellectual engagement. Some few months after my intellectual tirades with my distinguished colleagues, I was invited to the United States to showcase my adopted innovative methodology of researching Yoruba pre-colonial past by Professor Ogen, the then president of the African Studies Association of the United States. Emerita Professor Major McIntosh assisted in putting together an elegant special panel tagged New Directions in African Historiography for this purpose. Around this period, I was also invited to 4 high-profile international conferences marking the bicentenary anniversary of the abolition of the slavery at the University of New York, the University of Cape Coast, the University of North, and the University of South. These conferences afforded me unique golden opportunities of meeting and bonding with world-renowned giants in the field of slave trade studies, such as the late Professor Ajeli Afiu, Joseph Inaugural, Edward Appas, Peter Mark, Odili George, and several others. In fact, my presentation at the University of Nantes titled Regional Variations and Localizing, a comparative analysis of the dynamics of the transatlantic slave trade in Eastern Yoruba land, was not only adjudged as one of the best presentations during the conference, but was later revised, translated into French by the conference organizers, and published in French by the University of Rennes Press. It should be noted that the University of Rennes, founded more than 5 centuries ago, precisely in 1461, is reputed to be one of the best universities in France, and coincidentally with our Vice Chancellor, it is also spread across 6 campuses, like our university. The translation and publication of this work marked a decisive milestone in my academic career. It is a grand celebration of my revisionist methodology and novel findings, an epochal elevation of my scholarship to a global multilingual level. Because when your work became getting translated in major languages, that is a big deal. It underscores the inherent intellectual benefit of shunning out original works that can challenge existing wisdom and generate robust academic debate. So I have to thank Professor Olatunji Ojo because he catapulted my scholarship into this global theoretical debate on the transatlantic slave trade. And it shows that scholars will always welcome open criticisms of their works. Ordinarily, and given the lively debate and healthy controversy that ensues from my modest contribution to the burgeoning historiography on the slant and classic trade as initiated in the preceding paragraph, one may be tempted to assume that one has paid his dues. However, it is interesting to know that my intellectual exertions on this specialty continues to be rewarded with phenomenal recognitions and honors from the African diaspora. As far as my contribution to the debate on the transatlantic slave trade is concerned, a greater honor beckoned from the State University of Rio de Janeiro, Brazil, where I presented a paper on historicizing African contributions to the emancipation movement. I'm happy to announce that the chairman of my panel at Rio is seated with us here. His Royal Majesty Abadedo Kambola Njorongo Keila was the chairman of the panel, a brilliant scholar and educational pedagogue by excellence in his own right. Surprisingly, after my presentation, Kabiyesi jokingly pronounced me as a professor and insisted that the quality of the paper I presented justified his royal pronouncement. Kabiyesi. What is of utmost significance is that I was the 11th scholar at the School of Oriental and African Studies, University of London, when I attended the conference in Rio. And my sponsorship to that conference was made possible by no less a person than my teacher, who is also seated here, Professor Tunde Babawani. The condition for attending that conference will be that I have to upload my publication on the SOAS University of London website before I'll be allowed to travel. So I did that, and surprisingly today, that paper that I uploaded has been downloaded over 7,000 times from 62 countries. It is currently around 92 out of 27,697 entries. But what is even interesting is that it is now one of the prescribed texts for teaching Black War religions at the College of Black War Studies, Loyola University, Chicago. It is also the prescribed text for teaching globalization and development at the Department of Sociology, Trinity College, Dublin. Furthermore, that is one single publication where it can transport a scholar to download it more than 7,000 times from 62 countries, and people continue to download, and there are still some other benefits as I go. Furthermore, as far as my contribution to Haitian slave revolt is concerned, of particular significance is my present collaboration with Dr. Chantal George of the University of Glasgow on Yoruba cultural and religious influences in Grenada. Chantal read the Haitian paper online and immediately contacted me. And that marked the beginning of our mutually rewarding academic collaboration since 2010. She is currently the principal investigator of the Art and Humanity Research Council funded project on transforming public understanding and Grenada's African religious heritage under the auspices of the University of Glasgow. As her appointed host and Nigerian project partner, I will once again be welcoming Chantal to UNIOSO next week for her third research visit to Nigeria. Mr. Vice Chancellor, and my distinguished audience, you must be wondering what makes this paper on the Haitian Revolution so intellectually revolutionary for it to become the prescribed text for teaching African religion in the diaspora, downloaded more than 7,000 times from 62 countries and around 92 out of over 27,000 entries. It boils down to revisionism, and the kernel of my revisionist argument goes thus. Sorry. Chancellor, sir. The Haitian Revolution was the first incident of mass emancipation in a colonial society and the only slavery vote in recorded history that resulted in the formation of a modern state. However, existing canonical works on this revolution have largely concentrated on providing a central symbiotic relationship between the slavery vote and the broader changes in the Atlantic world during the 18th century. Of particular significance are the forces unleashed by the 1789 French Revolution, the Enlightenment, which advocated for a rational basis for reorganizing the state, and the political independence of the United States. Thus, it has been widely assumed that the Haitian Revolution was intellectually inspired solely by Western cultural values and the political vicissitudes of Western civilization. Franklin Knight, in his insightful word in not means word in reiterating this fact, the victory of the slaves in 1792 was ironically a victory for colonialism and the revolution in fact. Indeed, the activities of Duty Bookman, who ignited the revolution, has been reduced to a mere footnote in the body of the prevailing Western bias, Haitian hegemony historiography. Another major drawback of the current canons on the Haitian Revolution is the reluctance to locate the larger cultural significance, typicality, and centrality of the Yoruba gods of Shango and Ogen to the eventual success of the Haitian slavery. That was where I came into the debate. My argument was that what happened in Haiti was borrowed for us, part of our culture, and we were the drivers of that revolution, and I proved it. In a major historiographical revision of the prevailing literature on the Haitian Revolution, I argue most vehemently, with convincing evidence that the revolution was historically rooted in the legendary Yoruba tradition that abhors injustice, corruption, and oppression, and that the revolution represented the very best of Yoruba cultural attainment in the diaspora. Interestingly, about the period of the Haitian Revolution, similar revolutionary tendencies aimed at curbing dictatorship, imperial ambitions, and emphasizing the dignity of the human person were sweeping across Yoruba land. I further underscored the fact that the most potent rallying force that drove the Haitian Revolution was the Yoruba god of Ogen. In fact, it is an acknowledged fact that throughout the history of the human race, even up to the present moment, one of the most potent forces which human beings use to rally oppressed people together in their drive towards freedom and emancipation from their oppression is religion. The study resurrected the hitherto silent monumental contribution of enslaved Yoruba people in the diaspora to the abolition movement, and by situating the cultural roots of this revolution in its proper historical perspective and challenging one of the prevailing stereotypes about the meager contributions of enslaved Africans to the emancipation of African states. The study highlights the methodological challenges of reconstructing the history of this country in the diaspora. The Haitian Revolution was a unique case in the history of humanity and remains one of the most remarkable revolutions in the history of the modern world. It involved the establishment of a new nation by exploited states who successfully liberated themselves and radically and permanently transformed their society. The new state became the second independent state in the Americas. The revolution was the first anti-colonial racial war and the only incidence of mass emancipation in the colonial society. And in fact, the only slave revolt that eventually culminated in the modern state. My intervention rests comfortably on three theoretical foundations, which I consider the appropriate paradigms for a thorough understanding and appreciation. The first is the genetic model of comparative inquiry. The second has to do with the theory of theosophical intervention, and the last has to do with the theory of historical determinism. Two major trends are consistent and easily discernible in Yoruba history and culture. These are organization and adaptivity that Yoruba culture away from home sustains itself and adopts other culture more than any other culture. Prior to the outbreak of the Haitian Revolution, it has been found out that it was the Yoruba culture that acted as a catalyst that set many of the slave revolts in motion in the Americas. The most prominent of the slave revolts were at Os Palmares in Brazil, 1630 to 1697, Guyana in 1763, Suriname in 1715 to 1863, and most importantly Haiti from 1791 to 1805. In Bahia, the former capital of Brazil, the Yoruba helped to create an African state by force of numbers, while at Os Palmares, an African state was created by force of revolution. This experience endured more than 500 years and was unrivaled in the annals of Brazilian history. Duty Bookman used religion to organize virtually all the Yoruba slaves on the plantation. Soon, he had an island-wide movement against slavery. Thus, my counter-hegemonic historical intervention succeeded in resurrecting the silent aspect of the history of the most successful slave revolt in recorded history. The Haitian Revolution rubbished all slave societies. Anti-slavery movement grew stronger and bolder, especially in Great Britain, and the colonial slaves themselves became increasingly more restless. In the Caribbean, the white lost the confidence that he had before 1789 to maintain the slave system indefinitely. The contributions of Yoruba slaves to the demise of slavery in the Caribbean represent a major revision of the current historiography on the abolition movement, a historiography that is tilted mainly in favor of the activities of Europeans and Americans. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, there is no gainsaying the fact that Yoruba adheres to an ancient and cultural civilization, a culture that is distinguished by its artistic triumph, extraordinary oral literature, complex pantheon of gods, and an urban lifestyle. Our ancestors created sophisticated institutions of government. Our cultural impact is very great, not only in Nigeria, but also in modern Haiti, Brazil, Cuba, and the Americas, where Yoruba culture has been resilient, pervasive, and continues to be globalized. This remarkable cultural triumph makes the Yoruba experience one of the most fascinating subjects of historical study in the world. In the related developments, while I was articulating African contributions to the emancipation movement and the abolition of this slavery, I gave a detailed account of the activities of Barrister Louis Gama, the son of a Yoruba woman in the city of Salvador of Bahia province in Brazil. He was referred to as the real precursor of the abolition campaign in Brazil. He was not only a prolific writer, but also a brilliant lawyer who relentlessly promoted the trials of free people who were criminally enslaved, even to the point of illegally assisting in slave escapes. Meanwhile, whereas my research focus was on Louis Gama, a foremost abolition activist in Brazil, Professor Liza L. Castillo, a specialist in Afro-Brazilian history and culture, has been quietly working for years without my knowledge on Luisa Mahim, that is the mother of Louis Gama, the person that I worked on. Luisa Mahim gave birth to Louis Gama in Bahia in 1831, and in 1840 he was sold and shipped to Rio de Janeiro after which he never saw his mother again. Many years later, in 1882, he wrote a letter to a friend saying that his mother was a Yoruba woman named Luza Mahim. Under slavery in Brazil, there was a tendency to use one ethnic group as the last name. So if you are Olukoya and you are from Ostupa, you are named Olukoya or Ostupa. So Luza Mahim, that was the name. Mahim was from where he came from. So Mahim. So interestingly, in June this year, Professor Luza Castillo contacted me via email from her base in Salvador, Brazil. According to her, she recently came across one of my works on the slave trade in Southeastern Yoruba. And while attempting to locate information on the circumstances that led to the enslavement of Luza Mahim, she admitted that it has not been easy finding information about this 19th century history of the kingdom she came from, but that my work offered important light on the subject matter. In her bid to retrace the root of the famous Luza Mahim family to Eastern Yoruba, she sought my active collaboration. Given the fact that her son, Luza Gama, was well known and respected in the struggle for the abolition of the slave trade, an entire popular mythology sprung up about her mother's life. Though much has been written about her, nearly all of it is based on mythology. Given the paucity of written documents on the Mahim, we have decided to gather verifiable oral data, press poetry, cognomen, taboos and totems, praise on lineage, occupation, family names, appellation, secret or religious language, religious practices or rituals, and any other peculiar cultural traits of the Luza Mahim family in Brazil. We will then be comparing this trait with what is obtainable in Mahim land, situated in the coastal belt of Ondo State, so that we can discern possible similarities and differences. Most significantly, we will be collaborating with our colleagues in the medical sciences for DNA testing to make our findings more empirical and scientific. We will be collaborating with the Imperial African History and Genealogical Society, an organization that facilitates reconciliation between autosomal DNA tested African diaspora and Africans born on the continent of Africa. This will be a way of recovering over 200 years of lost history of the famous Luza Mahim family of Brazil. There is no doubt that the expected findings from this intercontinental and multidisciplinary collaboration promise to be groundbreaking with very rich historiographical reward. At the end of this study, my scholarship will have meandered into the newly emergent and blossoming field of genetic history. Now we move to Yoruba ethnic consciousness and Ikale identity. Though earlier studies suggest that the Ikale origin and ethnic identity are settled issues, as noted earlier, I argue that the study of the past can never be static and that there are no settled issues in history. Indeed, the epistemology of history reveals that since the 19th century, the practice of history has witnessed many shifts and turns in the way it is undertaken. As the product of the European 18th century Enlightenment, the empirical analytical model has become the epistemology for undertaking the study of the past. This is exactly what I have done with regard to my research into the origin, patterns of migration, and ethnic identity of the Ikale where I'm from. Consequently, an important point at this clear elucidation is on the antiquity of Yoruba ethnic consciousness and Ikale's ethnic identity. It appears several scholars suffer from the illusion that Yoruba ethnic consciousness or identity is relatively recent, and that its modern reference or general usage did not precede the 19th century. Their submission is that until about the 1890s, Yoruba land was a region of multiple ethnicities. For me, the correct picture would be that it was a region of multiple sub-ethnicities. In fact, according to Robin Law, the Yoruba had no generic name for themselves before the 19th century, and a sense of common ethnic identity first arose in the diaspora rather than the homeland. He added that, and I quote, "It is well established that the Yoruba as a self-conscious ethnic group, tribe or nation, are a recent phenomenon, if not an outright invention. That we were not conscious of the fact that we were Yoruba, we have a gap, separate." And that was what African scholars refer to as a region of different ethnicities, which are rather of ethnicities. This erroneous impression continues to be bandied about by the foreign purveyors of this view and their local apologists. Interestingly, on several occasions, I've had cause to disagree with our Africanist colleagues regarding the popular and widespread postulation. Professor Biodo Aderedron has also challenged this view when he suggests that a pan-Yoruba identity already existed in Africa, but only became more pronounced in the diaspora. He concludes that the different Yorubas of groups share linguistic, religious, and historical similarities. The kernel of my own argument is that Yoruba ethnic consciousness could effectively be dated back to the pre-Oduduwa era in Ile-Ife. I argue that the groups of people now referred to as Yoruba were culturally conscious of themselves as one ethnic group. They were united by a common language, Yoruba, as originally derived from the Ikedu language, a common Ifa religion, and striking uniformities in their socio-cultural, political, and economic organizations. It was this shared cultural attribute that made it easy for them to bond together in the diaspora. The arrival of Oduduwa and the series of dispersals from Ife further cemented this ethnic bond. Whatever name they might have called themselves, and in spite of the multiplicity of Yoruba dialects, the bottom line is that these ideas Yoruba subgroups were conscious of their common ethnic identity and the fact that they were ethnically different from the Igbo or the Hausa Fulani or any other non-Yoruba colonial group. Indeed, Oyo Empire at its peak of its power comprised other non-Oyo Yoruba speaking groups such as the Egbado, Egba, Awori, Igumino, Ekiti, and so on. During this period, virtually all the Yoruba subgroups regarded Ile-Ife as the spiritual center and source of common origin. These Yoruba subgroups, though not united, were conscious of the fact that they belong to a common stock. And I argue that it will sound very funny to argue that German ethnic consciousness did not predate the 1871 unification, simply because many of the then German kingdoms, duchies and principalities were partly disunited, and they refer to themselves as Bavarians, Prussians, Lipians rather than Germans. Do we then now assume that they were not conscious of themselves as Germans? The view that it was in the diaspora that the Yoruba folks became ethnically conscious of themselves as one group reads like a continuation of the Hamitic hypothesis by other groups. It is the same logic that informed the erroneous notion that Mungo Park discovered the Niger, or that the Kale country opened up to the outside world for the first time when Governor Glover opened the eastern route in 1872. On the second point, dealing with the Kale ethnic identity, a critical part of my explication of the Kale history that needs to be properly comprehended is the fact that I concentrated on the history of the mass of the Kale people and not on dynastic history. Indeed, more often than not, the history of the monarchy could be quite different from that of the generality of its subjects. Indeed, from my own in-depth study of the Kale tradition and that of its neighbor, it is incontrovertible that the Kale are historically and culturally Yoruba. The neat conquest of the area about the 16th century resulted in the imposition of Benin princes and representatives on the hitherto traditional stools of the Kale people. The Edo theory of origin, as contained in the Kale assessment report and the Kale intelligence report, was recanted by only 3 descendants of these Benin princes or representatives. Consequently, they related their own stories of origin and migration and not the general migration patterns of the Kale people. Indeed, the history of the Kale royalty is quite different from the history of the Kale people. According to the 1932 Kale assessment report, 3 chiefs are recognized as being Kale historians, and these are Oloja Newu of Ogbegabosoro, Bale Akenubi of Idekwe, and Bale Adekoye of Odeaye, and the general history was related to. Only 3 people. And then we get this document in the archive and we make a fetish. We worship them. How can only 3 people relate the history of 9 kingdoms as a day? Ikale had 9 kingdoms. Given this admission, it is not surprising that the report proved unsatisfactory to even the British officials who facilitated its compilation. Indeed, the Honorable Secretary, Standard Southern Provinces, in a letter dated 26 June 1933, condemned and completely rejected the entire report. And I'll quote him. His Honor was not convinced that the people as a whole, from the lowest unit in the social scale to the highest, had been consulted at every stage of the inquiry, and that the scheme reflected not only their wishes but also accorded with their national institutions. So the Kale assessment report, the Kale intelligence report, was rejected by even the people that documented it, but still we still keep it in the archive, we take it to court, and we get our history from there. And that's what I think the poverty of archival sources when it comes to reconstructing the history of African people, pre-colonial people, and that could not make me popular, because it is not what people want to know. As succinctly argued elsewhere, given the postmodern theoretical leanings of my studies on Southeastern Yoruba land, derived mainly from my reliance on the multidisciplinary tools of historical linguistics, especially empirical comparative anthropology, ethnography, and social anthropology, my innovative methodology, revisionary thinking, firmly establishes an empirical basis for Yoruba identity and migration studies. We'll quickly look at slavery and the slave trade in the Kale and the Kale pre-colonial political economy. It is instructive to recount some of the prejudice and stereotype Akada reports of European missionaries, British officials, colonial anthropologists, and their local activists on the Kale socio-economic and political superstructure. For these commentators, even up to the 19th century, the Kale had no kings to unite them. It is in the archive. They had they lived in hamlets in a primitive state, and were socially lower than other Yoruba. The Kale were also painted as the people who had no market, where they buy and sell provisions because they were averse to trade. They were further described as half-naked, greasy-bodied, dirty, and covetous people. For this Hegelian tyrant, that is what I call them, Hegelian tyrants, James Africanus' haughty 1968 response to the degrading and humiliating remarks about Africans and more specifically the people of Abeokuta by colonial anthropology seems very apt. To be sure, Houghton was magnanimous enough to the extent that he simply attributed these false and unfair remarks to ignorance. Interestingly, in spite of the efforts of fine minds like Houghton and the monumental efforts of the Ibadan School of History from the 1960s to the 80s to correct these racist views about Africa, the big questions remain. To what do we owe the re-echoing of these banner views, even in the 21st century, and even by African historians themselves? The most striking thing is the way colonial anthropologists and those who revere their account think in rigid categories. Apparently, their submissions apparently smack of an admixture of ignorance and age-old misconception. We are fortunate, sir, to have other sources to reconstruct the political economy of the Kale-speaking people, especially the account of some European officials as well as scholars who lived among the Kale and conducted field studies in the Kale land. One of these is Paul Richards. Paul Richards stayed long in the Kale land and understood the resilience and social dynamics of the Kale and cultural practices, and we have this to say. The Kale in the 19th century have not shown themselves to be especially peripheral or backward. They had participated as strongly as any other group in the mercantile network of the Nigerian network. That the Kale specialization in food production was not just second best is shown by the fact that they vigorously expanded their supply to delta towns such as Sapele, Warri, and eventually as far as Lagos. End quote. These early colonial anthropologists and British officials alleged that the Kale was not on a major trade route and largely a backward economy until the so-called opening of the Ondo route in 1870. Paul Richard also corrected this misleading notion. He is of the opinion that settlement on the mainland region have a long history of involvement in trade, and that the majority of the periodic matter in the Okiupa region are to be found in this boundary zone. Similarly, Richard, in his study of the Kale farming system, found abundant evidence of experimental, adaptive, and innovative action by Kale farmers. And an outstanding example, which one must mention, is the brilliant indigenous experimentation with the possibility of germinating yams from yam seeds. That is indigenous, trying to germinate yam from yam seedling, not IIT. And the second one is the indigenous knowledge in checking the menace of variegated grasshopper, a cassava pest of epidemic proportion. These feats could not have been achieved or could not have been the hallmarks of an indolent, lonely, and barbaric group. It is indubitable that the ancient pre-colonial social, political, and economic organization of the Kale people was a sharp contrast to the picture painted by the missionaries and earlier colonial anthropologists. Thus, my work has sufficiently proven that the colonial leaders of barbarism foolishness and indolence, which were pinned on the Gale people, emanated from the abysmal ignorance and lack of proper understanding of the socio-economic and cultural dynamics of Gale society, like the early European visitors. Most of them passed through the coast just once. They didn't even bother to sleep, and they felt they knew enough to document what they documented. But when another set of Europeans came, who lived among the people and stayed with them and studied them, they wrote a different report. My journey into Yoruba socio-cultural and religious history. This aspect of my scholarship emanated from an academic collaboration with Professor Inaugural, one of the foremost African scholars in the United Kingdom. This collaboration started with the award of a British Academy Fellowship in 2008, wherein Insa served as my host and mentor at the University of Birmingham. The positive consummation of this academic partnership resulted into a joint application for a large-scale research project on everyday Nigeria. The 1.5 million euro research grant was carried out from 2012 to 2018 by researchers drawn mainly from the University of Birmingham and Osun State University. It was the first ethnographic survey of Southwest and also the largest academic survey outside the field of public health in the Southwest. The project team included 15 Nigerian-based and 5 UK-based team members who were trained in field research methods, including ethically required protocols. Reflecting our shared research interest in the history and anthropology of Yoruba, the survey number 2,809 respondents covered 31 communities drawn from 18 local governments across the 6 Southwest states and Kwara. In the main, the project explored how the fine grain of everyday life in an interreligious society is linked to both social identity and non-violent resolution of conflict. The project developed a database suitable for multi-method analysis such as SPSS, data, and so on. Project findings and reflections were presented as research seminars and academic conferences within Nigeria, in Ibadan, Ede, Osogbo, and outside Nigeria. And outside Nigeria at the University of Leeds, Birmingham, London, Washington, Berlin, Harvard, and Johannesburg. And quite a number of articles, indeed, including an edited book, came out of this research endeavor. 3 former members now have their PhDs. 3 former team members now have their PhD, while 4 others are on the final stages of their PhD thesis. More than half of the team members have secured teaching appointments in Nigerian as well as foreign universities. A follow-up grant from the University of Leeds to carry out further studies on the resilience of Yoruba culture and the globalization of African religious practices was known in 2022. The research was completed in 2023 and the report of our findings will soon be published. In 2023, UniOSU emerged as the first university in Nigeria to win the prestigious UNESCO International Fund for Cultural Diversity. The UNESCO evaluation report, Mr. Vice Chancellor, the UNESCO evaluation report described the project as having great potential to impact the long-term development of southwestern Nigeria. But most significantly for this audience, UNESCO endorsed UniOSU, and I quote, secure basis for organization capacity in teaching, research, and community services. That is an endorsement from UNESCO, and we have to thank our founding fathers and our management. The project, which is ongoing, focuses on the conduct of research, training, and policy advocacy on the diversity of Yoruba, of cultural expressions in Yoruba land. Still on the associated post-research activities of the ROC project. Just last month, Osun State University also emerged as one of the 4 institutional beneficiaries of a new German Research Foundation funded grant on the role of social identities in interreligious arrangement across sub-Saharan Africa. The 2-year grant is a transcontinental research collaboration that will bring into academic conversation colleagues from the University of Munster in Germany, the University of Birmingham, Osun State University, University of Glastonbury, and Makerere University. The collaboration is expected to serve as the foundation for future large-scale joint research and the mentoring of early career scholars from the participating universities. Essentially, the research entails visiting fellowships at the University of Munster for team members, organization of 2 international conferences in Germany, Nigeria, and Uganda, and the setting up of a transcontinental scholarly exchange mechanism through the creation of a project database and compilation of relevant available literature for shared use among the participating institutions. It should be noted that this grant is an integral component of the larger Religion and Politics Cluster of Excellence, which is housed at the University of Munster and valued at 31 million. It involves 140 researchers drawn from 10 countries and more than 20 disciplines in the humanities and social sciences. The research, which is premised on the fact that religion is an engine of political and social change across the world, is the largest research network of its kind in Germany. Mr. Vice Chancellor, sir, engaging with the popular canons of Yoruba historiography, the Ife Oduduwa and Ife, the Nekan. In this section, I would like to draw great inspiration from Michael Trulot's seminal book, which he called Silencing the Past, Power and Production of History. Trulot, a highly distinguished scholar at Johns Hopkins University, produced a sparkling and beautifully written interpretation of the past by examining the suppression of the role of Africans in the Haitian Revolution to demonstrate how power silences certain voices in history. Trulot travels to unravel the many ways in which the production of historical narratives was doubly effective. Trulot tries to unravel the many ways in which historical narrative involve the unequal contribution of competing groups and individuals who have unequal access to the means of such production. Historical silences conditions how society remembers the past and establish historical significance. The use of counter-storytelling as a form of resistance has a long tradition. Counter-hegemonic history is a powerful methodology for telling the history of silenced groups and as a way of analyzing and challenging majoritarian narratives. By mainstreaming the historical experiences of oppressed and marginalized groups, counter-hegemonic historiography can help strengthen traditions of social, political, and cultural survival and resistance. In the past, Yoruba traditional system and values garnered so much respect and admiration. But over the years, the culture and heritage of the Yoruba nation have not been as vibrant as they used to be. Against the backdrop that the awe, reverence, and mystery associated with the Yoruba royalty has been dissipating over the years, it would seem that the monarchical institution will now be judged on the practical benefits it brings to society, rather than getting embroiled and distracted by the unending battles for royal supremacy and controversies. A good number of our monarchs are now convinced that royal popularity and respectability can only be sustained when the Yoruba worship institution concentrates primarily on how to develop Yoruba land socioeconomically, culturally, and securely in a sustainable manner. Interestingly, the array of highly distinguished Yoruba monarchs seated here today, and those who are with us online, is celebratory of this new thinking. The new fight is monarchical philanthropism laced with the quest for unity and socio-economic progressivism across Yoruba land. Mr. Vice Chancellor, permit me to sign the caveat here so that my professional intervention on the pre-colonial history of Yoruba land will not be misconstrued or politicized. In the main, it is driven by the conviction that every Yoruba group, irrespective of the fact that it is currently historically privileged or historically marginalized, has the fundamental right to investigate and project its origin, patterns of migration, intergroup relations, and cultural peculiarities into the mainstream of Yoruba history. Our strength must be anchored on our rich cultural diversity. Silencing it is counterproductive. In the context of this lecture, I argue that sustained attempts were made to silence the history of some indigenous groups that hitherto reigned supreme during the pre-Oduduwa era in Yoruba land by a new concrete political elite who employed a new history as a legitimizing tool and felt that the best way to consolidate its holding power and to bolster its authority was to define its identity in a way that would make the new elite appear more superior and more powerful than the indigenous population whom it had established its truth. Historical silences deal with historical personalities, events, or narratives that were silenced deliberately or otherwise in the mainstream of historical narrative. For instance, the silencing of the history of the Ogen, a pre-Oduduwa Yoruba group in the Ife that was displaced by the legendary Oduduwa, fit perfectly into the historical trajectory of what took place in 518. This group now inhabits the coastal fringes of southeastern Yoruba. As usual, my studies on pre-Oduduwa Yoruba derive from an extensive collection and comparison of Ufe and Ugbo cultural artifacts, especially rituals, oriki, Ifa verses, and totems. In-depth ethnographic survey of the study area, evidence from dialectology and anthropology, copious criticism and analysis of various ancient and extant literature on the history of and post-Oduduwa. Of particular significance are navigational maps of coastal Yoruba land dating back to the 15th century and Portuguese and Dutch travel records relating to the coastal fringes of Yoruba land from the 16th to the 18th century. There is no gainsaying the fact that Ugbo's connection with Ife is of considerable antiquity. In fact, there is abundant evidence to show that the original inhabitants at Ife, before the Oduduwa takeover, were the The point is, there is no woman that can come to Ife to claim an inch of that territory. They cannot be anything in Ife. But they have the right to trace their origin, to know where they come from. That is valid. That must not be silenced. That is the position. John Windham, an assistant district officer in Yoruba land in the early 1900s, conducted a series of interviews with the 46th Order of Ife Oba Adelekun Olubuche I, 1894 to 1910. Oni Adelekun and the then Araba Ife were interviewed together on the ancient history of Ife. The interview was published in 1921 in London as Myths of Ife. The book was out of print for a very long time until relatively recently when it was digitized and placed. I'll read a short extract from this ancient class. In the vast forest, and thus was born the first fair daughter of Oduduwa city. Men called her Ugbo, and the leader took the name Olugbo of Ugbo with his shepherds. Case closed. Empirically, and up to the present day, especially when viewed from the analytical lens of comparative dialectology and historical linguistics, the Ife dialect is closer to the Ugbo dialect than any other Yoruba dialect. Because in dialectology, you use dialect to establish when groups migrated, when they separated. And we now discover that Ugbo is about 250 kilometers away to Ife. Meanwhile, the Ugbo dialect is closer to the Ife dialect than Elisha. That is the other. So if people want to know their origin, and they are saying, we were from here, and then we migrated, there shouldn't be anything that was wrong. That it's a fact, and nothing can change it. By relying on the word list of 400 basic items, we are moving into linguistics. We added up the number of similar sounding words with the same meaning which the two dialects share, and thereafter calculated the percentage cognate coefficient between the Ife and Ugbo Ilaje dialect. Our findings reveal that the Ilaje dialect has 85% cognate correspondence with the Ife dialect. These findings support our earlier submission that the totality of Ife cultural attainment is mainly derived from the ancient Yoruba Oduduwa civilization at Ife. Akinyobi, as far back as 2002 and in 1984, asserts that the history of Ugbo was suppressed by the new political elite, but that the remnants of this early culture preserved their history and dialect in the Ikedu tradition. The Ikedu, as described by Akinyobi, was more like a school where the secret history of a previously existing system was suppressed by the existing authorities. Though Professor Akinyobi insists that the language of the Ikedu is archaic and almost extinct, one is both to affirm that at least the only version of the Ikedu that is readily available, especially the one dealing with the origin of Ife, is an easy read for anybody who is well versed in the Ilaje dialect. In a recent publication titled Identity, Trade and Warfare in Inaugural, I deftly utilized evidence from the Ikedu tradition, Benin, Ikale, and Ugbo oral sources, as well as early Portuguese travel documents and maps of West Africa to reconstruct the pre-colonial histories of this ancient kingdom. As usual, this latest publication, which was based on my adopted innovative revisionist methodology and painstaking research, was described as excellent by Professor Susan Preston Blair, a famous Harvard University professor of art history and African American studies. She contacted him in May this year after reading the set piece and thereafter sought my research collaboration to explore the history of the various Obalufon late dynasties in Yoruba land, and also provide a deeper overview of the sacred Ikedu tradition. Field work for this new research will be commencing later this month, and we are also agreed to come up with a co-edited book at the end of the research meeting. Another canon which we also need to settle very fast is the Ugbo Bini canon. The Bini authorities have been claiming that they don't owe Ife anything, and that the Yoruba cultural influences in the beginning kingdom are not Ife-derived. And if we now can prove that the earlier inhabitants of Ile-Ife are from, or they are Ugbo, and Bini is now claiming that it is only Ugbo that has cultural influence on it. The summary is that the totality of Bini, of Yoruba cultural influence on the beginning kingdom is actually Ife. So Ife is right in that assertion. Because if you are claiming that you are from a particular group, and that group is saying that they are from Ife, so then that debate should be settled. Because our work as historians also involves that we educate the public so that people don't make mistakes. If Oba Bini is claiming that they are not from Ife, that it is only Ugbo that they owe allegiance, and Ugbo is saying we are from Ife. You know, that is why history unites. Everybody is a Bible. Let me now bore you with my rantings on that. My contribution to historical biography. I have succeeded in propounding a new theory for biographical studies, and it is called critical sociobiography. It is a relatively new theory and method for biographical studies, because we don't want biography to just go into hagiography or pressing. A critical socio-biographical approach situates the activities of a historical figure within the prevailing socio-political, economic, and cultural milieu of his or her social environment. In other words, it accords equal recognition to the activities of a historical figure and other fundamental factors that shape the character of human society. This approach rejects the kind of history that places great men and women outside societal influences and sees them as imposing themselves by virtue of their greatness on their societies. This is because the latter approach has the tendency of deifying heroes, thereby encouraging the perception of the great man as standing outside society and eclipsing the age in which he lived. This critical socio-biographical approach serves as the theoretical foundation of Ogen 2006, the active factor in contemporary Nigerian politics, Arifado and Ogen 2005, Sisi Adeni Jones. I'm calling Ogen because that is the way you pronounce it, but it is Ogen. So that we don't think it's another author, so you still know I'm wrong. Ogen 2010, the doyen of Nigerian nationalism, remembering Herbert Macaulay. And recently, the one that we definitely applied it in OUSO and Ogen 2021 to x-ray the life and times of our Chancellor, Apostle Dr. Olukoya. The book's central argument is that the projection of the positive human legacies of Dr. Olukoya appears to be the best way of deepening our understanding of the glorious career of a quintessential benefactor, philanthropic billionaire, and a living legend. What we did was to focus on her mentees, that if you actually want to understand Dr. Alakija, look at what he has done with his mentees, and we got them together, we interviewed them, and we were able to come up with a kind of biography that is different from just pressing. From digital history to e-learning to more random now. Without any formal training in ICT, the turning point that brought my irrevocable commitment to the application of ICT to every human endeavor came in 2006, when I accidentally came across a book written by Daniel Cohen entitled Digital History, which was first published in 2005. The book became my regular companion for many years because it is written with a style that makes digital history intelligible to those of us that are not IT savvy. I found myself really fascinated by scientific innovations, especially the rapid and stupendous advances in information and telecommunication technology, which have redefined our modernity, reshaped our values. I was also greatly inspired by the efforts of Professor Charles Adeshino to the development of a digital oral history and information retrieval archive at the University of Ibadan. His gallant efforts in this regard are well documented in his inaugural lecture delivered some 10 years ago. The high point of my modest contribution to digital history, e-learning and e-administration was the invitation from Southern University, Baton Rouge in 2017 to give the keynote address at its international conference on accounting information system as well as communication technology. I had to address a gathering of accountants, financial experts, and ICT groups. At the end of my presentation, the Board of Southern University International Center conferred on me a Lifetime Achievement Award in ICT adoption. But most significantly and surprisingly, I was totally humbled when Her Excellency Sharon Westenbro, the Mayor President of the city of Baton Rouge, the capital of the state of Louisiana, appointed me as the honorary Mayor President of the city with all rights and privileges. Before departing Baton Rouge, I was appointed as a full research professor, a visiting full research professor and senior mentoring scholar. A PhD student was also assigned to me for mentoring and co-supervision. Additional recognition came when I was appointed in 2018 as an endowed professor of education by the Board of Trustees of ICT University Foundation. The professorial share is fully funded share, specifically meant for the advancement of ICT-driven education in Africa. I have successfully supervised 3 PhD students under this endowed share. And my audience will be impressed that ICT University also has this kind of audience as we speak online. The VC is there, the Chairman Board of Trustees, the DVC, and the staff, they are listening to this lecture. Mr. Vice Chancellor, it is apposite at this junction to briefly access some of my contributions to digital history and ICT education. The big question is, what are the giant strides that made me a deserving candidate for this accolade and honor? In 2014, I was appointed Provost of the College of Education, and on assumption of essence, I considered an IT revolution as the framework upon which the achievement would be built. And within the first year, I had succeeded in deploying a scalable network infrastructure with state-of-the-art data center and a 12.7 kilometer optic fiber cable across campus. This was followed by the digitization and archiving of all college documents from 1964, when the institution was founded, to 2018. Over 6 million documents were digitized, filed, and referenced for easy access. Of misplaced, missing files and documents were also checked. We deployed an electronic document management system which ensured that official correspondences and movement of memoranda among principal officers and top management are digitally executed irrespective of one's location at any particular time. The college virtual learning system complemented the campus internet TV and online campus radio based on internet fiber. The campus internet TV and radio were the first in any Nigerian higher institution. In 2015, we pioneered electronic voting for student union elections, and apart from the computerization of the voting process, even debates, the presentation of campaign manifesto, and almost all the entire electoral process were done virtually. Elections took place even during examinations without friction, and students can vote from the comfort of their homes. This novel idea engendered peaceful and transparent electoral. With the successful deployment of the college electronic price and monitoring software, the college emerged as the first MD, and I repeat, the first MDI in the country to embrace electronic procurement in the awards of contract in line with the 2007 Procurement Act, a feat duly acknowledged by the Bureau of Public Procurement on NTA News Panorama of 27 September 2016. The commissioning of 10 projects within 10 months attests to the magic wand of e-procurement, and a book, Mr. Vice Chancellor, has been written. 10 projects in 10 months, the magic of e-procurement. It is what I recommend for every student. In the area of digital security, we became the first higher institution in Nigeria to acquire a high-tech multipurpose drone for digital security and interconnected our campus to the nearest police station. A 24-hour area survey of the entire campus became possible from the central security room, from the Fago police station, and even from my laptop and other Android devices. The security drone effectively complemented over 50 CCTV cameras deployed in strategic locations. And in my 4 year, no strike, no student riot, nothing, everything was peaceful. The digitization of the Ibadan School of History series. Apart from the fact that I started utilizing digital tools, such as Zotero Digital Archive, digital maps, digital library repositories for my research, It is important to know that in 2018, I hosted 7 of the pioneers of the Ibadan School of History. These eminent first-generation historians included Professor Banji Akintoye, Emeritus Professor Jide Oshotokun, Emeritus Professor Anthony Asiwaju, late Professor Baro Ikeme, Professor Tajudeen Gbadamusi, late Professor Adayo Yaya, late Professor Tunji Olorunsimeni. After the meeting, I facilitated the digitization of the entire 15 volumes of the Ibadan History Series, thereby preserving for posterity the famous history classics that are already out of print. And even before that, I had facilitated in conjunction with Insanote the digitization of the entire BA and PhD thesis from 1966 to 2015 at the Department of History and Strategic Studies, University of Lagos, where I was trained. Mr. Vice Chancellor, it is a delight to report that in commemoration of this inaugural lecture, Insanote and myself have commenced the digitization of all final year long essays and the entire student and staff file of the Department of History and International Studies of this university since inception in the department. In addition, the establishment of the Shola Akinrin Digital Archive and the Shinyo Iwe Digital History Museum at our Akure campus has just been approved by the Vice Chancellor. It is being funded from the 2024 approved budget for post-research activities under our European Research Council's fund research collaborative project. The Digital Archive and Museum will be serving as the necessary precursor for the floating of the proposed Center for Digital Humanities at the Ikera campus of University. This proposal emanated from the award of a Carnegie African Diaspora Fellowship in 2023, where I served as host and collaborator to Dr. Molola Olomuji, the visiting Carnegie Fellow from Georgia College and State University. Our collaboration was in view of establishing a Center for Digital Humanities at Osun State University. It is hoped that the establishment of this center will assist in bridging the existing gap in the field of digital humanities in Nigeria. And the proposed center will be the second to be established by any university in Nigeria, the first being the Center of for Digital University at the University of Lagos. Significantly, our push for digitization also received a boost with the UNESCO International Fund for Cultural Diversity. The project valued at $100,000 is targeted at the promotion of Yoruba oral art through new formats and digital channels, the reinvention of Yoruba cultural tales through digitization, animation, caricature, and cartooning technology are major components of this research. Conclusions and recommendations. Over the years, the totality of my ethnographic experience in several parts of Yoruba land, the Benin Kingdom, the Delta, Bakassi Peninsula, and the Yoruba inhabited district of Sierra Leone has taught me that no archive or library, no matter how well stocked, can match an in-depth ethnographic survey of one study area. It will amount to a great disservice to historical knowledge to cocoon oneself in the archive and rely almost exclusively on the biased and half-baked accounts of missionaries and British officials who merely passed through the coastal fringes of southeastern Yoruba. There is no proof that any of them stayed more than one night in any of the few villages that they passed through. Yet they said they knew enough about the socio-political and economic dynamics of coastal Yoruba to make their sweeping but fundamentally flawed pronouncements. The belief that European sources on pre-colonial Africa are the only way to grasp the meaning of the caliphate is a pointer to the fact that Africa is still faced with the challenge of how to reconstruct an autonomous historical site of its people and showcase an indigenous historiography that is devoid of the trauma of colonial historiography and Western historiographic dependence. The big questions remain. How can African historiography counteract thematic, theoretical, and methodological impositions by the North? For how long shall we continue to allow Northerners to establish the research agendas and methodologies for the history of Africa? A revisionist is interested in the promotion and expansion of many aspects of historiography and the various ways of knowing and interpreting it. Mr. Vice Chancellor, kindly permit me to make the following recommendations, even if we were discouraged, if historians were discouraged from making recommendations. Since I'm a reconnaissance historian, I'll have to go ahead and make my recommendation. First, and this will be for my colleagues, professional historians, we need to be conscious of the fact that a deepening of historical knowledge will naturally ensue from the application of new available methods, new sources of evidence, and shifts in perspective. There's nothing so unique about history to say that history students cannot take objective questions, because that is a raging debate, and we need to be sure. There's nothing. it will even bring out more objectivity. It depends on if we must embrace technology. We are too conservative. The advancement of this discipline is largely predicated on the adoption of theories for historical analysis, privileging multidisciplinary and collaborative research, prioritizing digital history, and the use of innovative and modern analytical techniques. Second, given the present moral decadence and depravity among our youth, I make an advocacy, and this is to our government, especially the government of the Southwest, of the reinvention of Yoruba cultural moral tales and its legendary Omoluabi, character education is what I call it, into our teaching curriculum. This new subject is to be taught in Yoruba language and made compulsory from the primary school to the university level. Our Ministry of Education and Culture in the Southwest are enjoined to start this initiative without further delay. Third, historical research remains a major pillar for cultural sustainability and societal development. Thus, this lecture hereby charges Afenifere to set a machinery in motion for the floating of a Yoruba Historical Research Foundation that will generally fund Yoruba History Fellowship, research grants, and prizes in our university. Kudos to Afenifere for prioritizing the socio-economic and political development of Yoruba land. However, the time is right for the broadening of its mandate to incorporate the promotion of historical research and cultural dissemination. I'm happy to know that the highly revered leadership of Afenifere was invited and is ably represented here by its National Organizing Secretary, Ababu Ogen. I'm sure he will deliver a message. Fourth, historical consciousness is pivoted to institutional and national development. More often than not, we continue to grope in the dark because of our neglect of history and the refusal to learn from the lessons of history. Government corporations, public institutions, banks, local government, etc. must have an office for the professional historian who will be saddled with the documentation and archiving of historical trajectory of each respective institution. The office will provide a valid framework and perspective to policymakers while taking important decisions. A pilot study in this regard is presently being undertaken by the Department of History and International Studies at Inaugural. We are trying to attach at least one of our students to all the departments we have in the university, all the colleges, registry posts. And what they will do is to help us gather data on this respective unit so that we can put everything together and they'll form the background to when we'll be writing the 20 years history of Ogen. Fifth, a discipline that cannot readily find a market for its product needs to critically review its overall philosophy and possibly fine-tune or overhaul its methodology. Given the public appetite for understanding past events, historians should start utilizing their historical insight to advise and make projections as well as provide solutions to current societal challenges. Sixth, why the enduring perception that history must have a global perspective that emphasizes diversity and peculiarity rather than the homogeneity inherent in the notion of globality. There is burning need to defend freedom of thought and expression in the field of historical society. You cannot really understand the whole without studying the past. It is very likely to study the past that you can now have an authentic history of the whole. No history should be silenced. Seventh, history is not owned by states or rulers, and we need to condemn the use of history to foster enemy images or distorted images. Freedom of thought and of expression requires dialogue. The current notions about our identities and communities are subject to revision and change. Acknowledgement. I'm deeply grateful to the following foreign universities and foundations for sponsoring my postdoctoral research: the American Council of Learned Society, Cadbury Foundation, Carnegie Foundation, European Research Council, ICTU Foundation, Leventis Foundation, the British Academy, and of course UNESCO, as well as the University of Leeds. I do owe a debt of gratitude to so many individuals, which we cannot recount here. But I must not forget my parents' perspective cannot be emphasized. This must be done without prejudice to the forms of coexistence who sent me to school, their blessed memory, and when my father was dying, I promised that I would project his name to all the four corners of the globe. And in that result, I'm happy that I have successfully memorialized and immortalized their memory, courtesy of befitting physical monuments donated and named after them in the primary and secondary schools that I attended. I appreciate the support of the late His Excellency Dr. Ogen for his remarkable interest and support for my research. I thank the late Chief Isaac Omotayo, who against my parental plea for more time forcefully enrolled me at LA Primary School in Utitu. He just came to the house and grabbed me and said, "This guy must go to school." Coming from illiterate parents, I entered primary school at the age of 5. I thank Professor Victor Agadu, who taught me at the primary school and adopted me as his junior brother since then. At the undergraduate and graduate levels, and all of them are seated here, I remain eternally grateful to Professor Tunde Babawale, Professor Abaya Biakiyeje, and Professor Akiaba for showering me with solid mentorship and profound love. They are simply unforgettable. For my graduate studies, I appreciate with fond memories my main PhD supervisor, the late Professor Ayila Adebayo. That is one supervisor. While other supervisors are exporting their students, my supervisor was giving me money. In perfect peace. I equally acknowledge the contribution of distinguished Professor Ayode, my second supervisor, who has always been a very stable source of inspiration to me. I thank Emeritus Professor Futokun, and of course, my mother, Professor Funke Adeboye, who is seated here for law. Now, what I do is express my gratitude to late Professor Mike Obey and late Dr. Paul for their encouragement. Of course, I must not fail to thank Professor Toyin Falola, from whom I have derived great intellectual inspiration, for his encouragement. He's here, he's listening to us, for love, for generosity and faith. He is an academic father of no mere. Many thanks to Professor Shola Akinriyade, a brilliant and strategic mentor like me. He discovered the hidden talents in me early enough and quickly ignited the global dimension to my scholarship. My relatively smooth and rapid career progression would have been impossible without you. You are deeply cherished and appreciated. I thank Professor Shinya Oyeweso, a mentor, a brother, and a friend, and a dependable ally. And he knows what I mean by all that. It's loaded. Many thanks to Professor Gadi Olatunde, Professor Okeshino, Professor Jolili Alamu, Professor Labokola. They were in the saddle as herdsmen in Union. As wanted and scholarship. The shower was love. Appropriate word filled me when I remember the deeds of some of my academic fathers and mentors that are seated here. Professor and Dr. Mrs. Richard Olani, mentors who stood by my family during a most challenging period of breech delivery at the Obafemi Awolowo University Teaching Hospital. You have a mentor who will be with you in the labor room, even in the wee hours of the night. That is mentorship. Also seated here is Professor Femi Balogun, for your undiluted love, sir. Former Vice Chancellor for now, for your mentorship, for your prayers, and for your extreme generosity. Thank you, sir. I thank Professor Antonia Shiwaju, who molded me, sharpened the tone and tenor of my scholarship before adopting me as his beloved son. I cannot thank him enough. Professor Akimba Deshomoyu is greatly appreciated for his guidance, as well as Professor Larry Fago for his profound work. I'm grateful to Professor and Professor Oladipo Aino, Professor and Professor Mrs. Shola Ehide, Professor Kemi Rotimi, Professor Charles Adechino, and so many who are too numerous to mention. I have with me here Professor Olushola Kainde, my very good friend, thank you, Professor Temi Ologunwusa, Dr. and Mrs. Rafiu Chuyele, Professor Olufemi Adeoluwa, as well as Professor Mrs. Yinka Ogunlade. Immense appreciation to Honorable Justice Ademola Enekome for solid brotherhood and faithful friendship spanning over 3.5 decades. A big thank you to Tunde Ojajuni, Jerry Akishele, Ganiu Salim, Adewale Adetu for their amazing love and support and generosity at all times. I wish to thank Dr. Ediola Feso Abagukole Morulu and several other brothers for supporting me. And I'm grateful to Marjorie McIntosh, distinguished Professor Emerita, University of Colorado, Abuja, for her interest in my scholarship. To my family in Birmingham, Professor Isalote, who is listening to us, and her husband, Professor Simon Green, as well as their lovely children, Anna, Tom, and Eddie. I thank you for your warmth and love. Your home has been my abode in the United Kingdom since 2010, and your mentorship has been invaluable. Thank you for bringing out the latent talent in me. I cannot but express my thanks to endowed Professor Victor Mbarika, Chairman Board of Trustees, ICT University, for his adoration and support for my scholarship, and his total dedication to ICT delivering education across the world. Thank the President of the Historical Society, Professor Samuel Agadinu, as well as all former presidents. I wish to appreciate the support and encouragement of the following highly respected traditional monarchs who are seated here this afternoon. His Royal Majesty of the Rashid Ayotunde Olabobi, the Arabic of the Pro-Chancellor and Chairman of Council, Federal University of Agriculture. His Royal Majesty Adedokun Abolarin Yorogofe Okela, who is also here with us. His Royal Majesty Oba Abdul Rashid, His Royal Majesty Oba Adekunle Okunwoye, Guru of Ibadan, who is joining us virtually from the US. His Royal Majesty Oba Dr. Adedayo Olushino Adekoya, the Odeole of Odeole Kingdom, President General of the Worldwide Ishishi Agaye Community. And I'm sure I also have the Onidire of Idire Omotosho in the house. Scholars interested in the changing rules of traditional rulers in the 21st century have a fresh perspective from which they can approach their subject matter, given the monumental contributions of these progressive monarchs to Nigeria's educational development and Yoruba cultural rejuvenation. Special thanks to my own royal father, His Royal Majesty of Michael Obatuga, the Jebu of Idiko, which here ably represented by the leader and second in command. Obviously, he was unable to make it and send his second in command. I wish to sincerely thank the visionary Vice Chancellor of Free State University, Professor Clement Adeboye, for his support and admiration for my testing and my scholarship since 2009 when I came in contact with him. He did everything humanly possible to make this inaugural a reality, even at short notice. I appreciate our amiable Deputy Vice Chancellor Ari, Professor Hafiz Bello, Professor Adekunle, wonderful colleagues and great friends. The Registrar of our great university, Mrs. Atinuka Otunde, the Bosa, the University Librarian, Dr. Olukoya Adewuyi, the Bosa, Mr. Akitayo Lasisi. I similarly thank Drs. Adeboyega Ibade, Dr. Bayo Lasisi, Alhaji Gafar Shitu, and Mr. Bolari Mafeluka for their support and brotherly love. I wish to thank all provosts, deans and directors, heads of department and units of UniOsun. I appreciate all professors and members of Senate, as well as the entire members of staff and students of UniOsun. Space constraints and limitation of time will not allow me to mention the name of everybody one by one. I say big thank you to members of the 21st Inaugural Lecture Planning Committee, Dr. Femi Abanikonda, Dr. Toyeshe Dansi, Dr. Jimoke Akiyode, Mr. Ademola Adesoji, and Mr. Adewo Adewolaoye, Professor Temitope Balogun, and Dr. Najib Toyeshe are deeply appreciated for proofreading the draft of this lecture at very short notice. Last but not least are members of my family, my siblings, or many thanks to my darling wife, Iyao, and our adopted children for their love, patience, sacrifice, and kindness. Finally, I thank God Almighty for a day like this and for His faithfulness. This inaugural lecture is my special birthday gift for the reawakening of new studies on our rich Yoruba cultural heritage. The lectures of kids are only when it begins to elicit reaction, even condemnations from scholars of Yoruba history and culture. Mr. Vice Chancellor, ladies and gentlemen, I thank you for the honor.
You have just listened to another inaugural lecture. Please, a round of applause. I wasn't sleeping throughout the lecture. Unfortunately, I'm a plant physiologist and biochemist, but I enjoyed listening to the dates and the names And the thing about ẹni tó bá fẹ́ ju kókó ìtàkìtà ló máa pa. It's not possible to end this kind of lecture to declare it closed without recognizing some great individuals here. It seems to me today that Ìpàdé Lọ́balọ́ba Ìpínlẹ̀ Ọ̀ṣun and Ogun State is only here. And Ogun State, Kábíyèsí, and Ogun State too. And also that the committee of vice chancellors meeting is also only here. Because there are so many vice chancellors in the hall at this moment. My colleagues from several universities around us. I will start with our international audience. We have colleagues joining us from United States, United Kingdom, people joining us from Canada, from Kenya, from you and your family. We thank you so much. We thank some other people. The former vice chancellor of this university is also online, Professor Olukoya, and several other people. We recognize all of you, not in any particular order. Welcome. We are very happy to have you in Osun State University. My colleagues from different places, I've seen many faces, and it will be difficult for me to go around just like that. But about Professor Ogen, the lecturer of today, he's a never smiling man. A man who doesn't complain. I give him tough things to do as my director in the Vice Chancellor's office. And we just gap, it goes out. And the solution will come. I declare this inaugural lecture closed.